Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about history. I live in Cheyenne, Wyoming, next door to Warren Air Force Base. Every year for the past 65 years, the Air Force Thunderbirds have performed here on July 22nd, which is Cheyenne Day. But not this year. About a week before July 22nd, they announced that they weren't coming. One of the airplane mechanics who's required to accompany the F-16s that make up the Thunderbirds has tested positive for COVID-19. So the Air Force made the decision not to show up for the first time in 65 years because one of their mechanics took a test for a virus and it came out positive. And not only that, Cheyenne Frontier Days, which is the biggest rodeo event in the country, was also canceled this year because of COVID-19. This was the first time Frontier Days has been canceled in 124 years. Frontier Days wasn't canceled during World War I when 20 million people died, and it wasn't canceled during the 1918 flu pandemic, which killed 50 million people around the world. It wasn't canceled during World War II, and it wasn't canceled during the 1957 flu pandemic, which was much deadlier than COVID-19. And it wasn't canceled during the 1969 flu pandemic either, which I'm going to talk about next. The 1969 H3N2 pandemic, which was known as the Hong Kong flu, killed between 1 and 4 million people around the world. Let's look at some of the things which went on during that pandemic, which was much deadlier than the current one. One of the more notable things is that we sent a man to the moon. Lyndon Johnson was not president when we went to the moon in 1969. But he spent his last few weeks in office in 1968 sick with the H3N2 flu. The first director of the CIA, Frank Dulles, died from the H3N2 virus. Dulles Airport near Washington, D.C. is named after that flu victim. We were sending a lot of people into space during 1968 and 1969 in preparation for the moon landing. In December of 1968, we launched Apollo 8. And the commander of that mission, Frank Borman, got sick while he was in orbit. It's believed that he contracted the flu from meeting President Johnson prior to the ship's departure. And then in July of 1969, we sent men to the moon on Apollo 11. This was the front page of the Santa Fe, New Mexican newspaper on that day. The paper has articles about the moon landing. It has articles about the war. It has an article about Teddy Kennedy killing Mary Jo Kopechne. Here's an article about another space mission, and at the bottom is an article about a movie which is being filmed in New Mexico. At the bottom right is an article about Vietnam, which interestingly has not seen a single COVID-19 death. But what's missing from this page are articles about the virus, which was much deadlier than the current COVID-19 pandemic. If you look at the New Mexican newspaper now, they're completely obsessed with the COVID-19 virus. We're going through a period in time right now of unprecedented hysteria. I missed the moon landing because my family had just moved to England. This is a picture I took in London this week in 1969. You might notice that despite the H3N2 pandemic, which killed more than 80,000 people in the UK, this girl is not wearing a mask. In fact, I didn't see a single person in London whose face was covered with a mask or with a burqa. Also during the summer of 1969, in the middle of the pandemic which killed 1 to 4 million people around the world, the largest concert in history was held at Woodstock. 400,000 people showed up for that concert. This is what baby boomers were doing during the 1969 pandemic, a far cry from what we see them doing now. Now let's go back to the Revolutionary War when there was a massive smallpox epidemic affecting the world. Smallpox was thousands of times deadlier to young people than is COVID-19. But George Washington, whose face was scarred because he almost died from smallpox when he was 19, went ahead with the war anyway. He made the decision to intentionally infect his troops with small amount of smallpox virus. Because General Washington infected the troops with very small amounts of the virus, most of them became sick, but they didn't die. But they did develop immunity, which allowed them to go on and win the Revolutionary War. Now let's compare that to what's going on with the Air Force Thunderbirds. One mechanic tested positive and they shut the whole thing down. The Air Force strategy seems to be to hide from the virus until it magically disappears. I lived through 2 pandemics which were deadlier than the current one, in 1957 and 1969. and I was barely even aware that they were occurring. Most people were familiar with the names Asian flu and Hong Kong flu, but they weren't hiding in their homes over them. London was a much more fun place 50 years ago, full of beautiful women, but now they have their faces hidden because of their religion or because the government is forcing them to do so. Our boomers who were so wild and free in 1969 have retreated to their bunkers. Last night when I was out walking the dogs, a couple started asking me questions about them, but the couple remained a full 15 feet away the entire time we were talking. Toto likes it better when people just walk up to him and scratch him behind the ears. Toto understands that risk is a part of life and that we all face many risks every single day. You can visit him on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science and propaganda for a long time.